I remember that last week I was playing a game of Monopoly with my cousin. In the game, I started slightly poorer than my cousin after unfortunately landing on his property at the start of the game. However, with that little more wealth than me, he bought more and more properties and constantly got richer, making me lose more and more of my wealth to him until I eventually went bankrupt. It's crazy to think about how much the gap between our wealth has widened after a slight difference in wealth at the beginning of the game. The game of Monopoly we played is a perfect example of how capitalism could cause and exacerbate wealth inequality. And this was the original intent of Elizabeth Magie, the creator of Monopoly, to create this game. Elizabeth Magie, born in 1866, is the mother of the world-famous game Monopoly. Living in the United States, a highly capitalist nation, Elizabeth Magie witnessed the rise of inequality through poorly controlled laws on private ownership. Monopoly, originally called the landlord's game, is the model of a capitalist society created by Magie to demonstrate the flaws of free market competition and private ownership under capitalism that contributes to wealth inequality. These real-world issues with capitalism represented in Monopoly include the wealth inequality growing at exponential growth, the concept of being poor being more expensive, and real estate speculation. One of the flaws of free market competition and private ownership that Monopoly demonstrates is exponential growth. Monopoly demonstrates the concept of exponential growth in the gap between the rich and the poor, meaning growth with greater increases with passing time, creating the curve of an exponential function. In Monopoly, the more properties you own, the more rent you can collect from the other players, which makes your wealth grow exponentially. Here's an example. Let's say the richer player of a Monopoly game currently has $1,000 and can grow their wealth by 10% a turn on average with big number of properties, while the poorer player currently has $500 and can grow their wealth by 5% a turn on average with fewer number of properties. By using the formula f of x equals a times 1 plus r to the power of x, with a equals to the initial amount, r equals to the growth rate, and x equals to the number of turns, we'll be able to determine the total wealth of both players after x turns. As we can see from the formula, the wealth of both players is increasing at an increasing rate every round. However, since the rich player has more properties than the poor player, their wealth is growing at a higher rate, which causes the gap between the wealth to widen. With the initial wealth difference of $500, the difference quickly increases every round. Therefore, exponential growth is a phenomenon that can create and worsen wealth inequality in Monopoly and real life. The second inequality issue that Elizabeth Magie attempts to address in Monopoly is the Boots theory. The Boots theory is an economic theory first popularized by Sir Terry Pratchett, which states that the cost of being poor is higher than being rich. Here's an example of the Boots theory. Suppose person A and person B both wants to live in an apartment that costs $300,000 in the United States. While person A can afford to buy the apartment, being able to pay a 20% down payment of $60,000 and get a 30-year mortgage with a 5% interest rate. Person B does not have $60,000 and is only able to rent the house with a rent of $1,500 a month. Assuming the interest rate stays at 5% for 30 years, with a monthly mortgage payment of $12,088.37, calculated using the following formula. Person A is paying this much in total for a house that is worth $300,000, not considering the average annual growth rate of a stunning 5.4% in house prices in the United States. Meanwhile, person B is paying $540,000 over 30 years, assuming the rent stays at $1,500 for 30 years. Despite person B is paying more than person A for a 30-year residency in a $300,000 house, person B will not own the house since they are only renting. This is a classic example of how being poor can end up costing you more, and how being rich initially can bring you more wealth. Monopoly also tries to demonstrate this concept by making the rent a payment for the unfortunate that will not benefit the players from any aspect, similar to its purpose in real life. Thus, Monopoly reflects the reality of how being poor can trap people in a cycle of poverty, while being rich can bring people more opportunities and advantages by making the rent a burden for players who do not own properties, while making the property owners richer. Another inequality challenge of capitalism that is revealed by monopoly is real estate speculation. Real estate speculation is the practice of buying and selling properties with the expectation of making a profit from the price increase. Although real estate speculation is a completely illegal form of investment in the United States, it is considered unethical by believers of the left-wing economic ideologies such as Marxism, as it is generating wealth from the land that belongs to the community, and it causes a skyrocketing price of real estate, which decreases the affordability for middle and low-income groups. Having around 31.6% of the houses in the U.S. being non-owner occupied, real estate speculation is a significant issue in the United States, and it has led to the consequence of the ridiculous 14.07% increase in rent in the United States over 1 year from 2021 to 2022. Now, in 2023, Americans are, on average, paying 30% of their incomes on rent, giving around one-third of their monthly income to the rich landlords who are the culprits to the increasing rents. The increasing price of housing through real estate speculation can be demonstrated using a graph of supply and demand. In simple logic, when the housing of a region is being massively purchased by speculators, the housing in the region will increase in demand and decrease in supply. The decrease in supply will then result in an increase in price of the real estate in the region due to that rare things are more expensive in general. Monopoly illustrates this phenomenon through its color set system. According to the rules of Monopoly, when a player owns all the properties in a color set, which are 2 to 3 properties consecutive to each other, the price of the rent when another player lands on any properties in the region will be doubled. It is just as in the real world, the rent and housing prices would increase to the middle and low income groups when housings in the regions are dominantly controlled by speculators. As we've seen, Monopoly points out a lot of issues of capitalism which can create and worsen wealth inequality. It is pretty surprising how all of the problems addressed by Maggie are still so relevant in the United States, even over a century after the creation of Monopoly. With a Gini coefficient of 0.415, the United States is ranked as the second highest in wealth inequality among the developed nations in 2023. In case you're wondering, the formula for calculating the Gini coefficient is by calculating the ratio of the area between the perfect equality line and the Lorentz curve divided by total area under the perfect equality line on the graph shown. The perfect equality line, in short, is a line of the equation y equals x on the graph with the x-axis representing the bottom x% of households in the nation in terms of income, and the y-axis representing the percentage of the income the bottom x% of households holds of the nation. While the Lorentz curve is a curve that connects all the points plotted on the graph, the curvier the Lorentz curve is, it represents a more rapid increase in the percentage of the nation's wealth owned towards the last couple percentage of households, representing a higher income inequality. Therefore, with a high Gini coefficient, the wealth distribution status of the United States can be interpreted as that the majority of the nation's wealth is owned by a minority percentage of people. In fact, this has always been the wealth distribution status of the United States since the creation of monopoly. This is where Georgism comes in. Georgism, otherwise known as the single tax movement, in very simplified terms is an economic ideology came up by Henry George, combining aspects of both left and right-wing ideologies that believes while one should have the right to control and own the values that they produce themselves, the natural resources, such as the urban areas, should belong equally to all members of society, just like air. The Georgism philosophy has similar values as Indigenous Canadians, both emphasizing the importance of respecting the land. Georgist believes that it is rightful to put a land value tax on lands owned by an individual and replace it with all other taxes, such as income taxes and tariffs on imports, which people do not deserve to be taxed on. Elizabeth Maggie was a believer in the Georgist economic system, and she deeply believed that the system would be the optimal solution to the undergoing challenges of capitalism's poor control of freedom that led to inequality. Take real estate speculation as an example. With the land value tax of Georgism, the speculators would be stopped. Why? Well, due to that, with extra tax needed to be paid when owning properties, it would be a lot more difficult for speculators to gain wealth in the process of buying and selling properties. This way, housing would return to being a means of subsistence instead of a tool for investment for the rich. What do you think about the Georgia system? Monopoly is the microcosm of a capitalist society such as the United States. It can help us reflect on the inequalities that capitalism causes to the majority of the population through concepts such as the exponential growth of the wealth gap from private ownership, the boots theory, and real estate speculation. As said by Martin Luther King Jr., capitalism does not permit an even flow of economic resources. With this system, a small privileged few are rich beyond conscience, and almost all others are doomed to be poor at some level. That's the way the system works. And since we all know that the system will not change the rules, we're going to have to change the system. Thus, ideologies like Georgism started to rise and gain popularity and influence people like Elizabeth Magie. So the next time you play Monopoly, think beyond the board. Consider these great words of Martin Luther King Jr. and let them inspire you. Thank you for watching.
I finally finished Inquiry.